welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And today I wanted to talk about John Lennon's Walls and Bridges. I can't remember why I became curious about this album, but I thought it would be fun to check out more solo John Lennon. Earlier on this channel, I've talked about the Plastic Ono Band in a video that talked about the three Beatles singer-songwriters for solo albums. And I also did a separate review on Imagine. This album comes a few years after that, so it would be interesting to hear how John Lennon developed up to this point. This also is a very cool album in terms of album art. We see some childhood drawings from John Lennon on the front and this silly picture of him with different pairs of sunglasses on his face. I suppose you could say my experience listening to this record felt like listening to Plastic Ono Band and Imagine, but with a more complete sound. So track one, Going On Down on Love, begins with kind of a drum circle bit, suggesting the kind of minimalist hippie vibes of early solo John Lennon work, where the focus was more on creating a protest vibe or a counterculture vibe than on necessarily creating a good song. Yet instantly the music filled in, so we got the best of both worlds. We got sort of give peace a chance era protesty John Lennon with something that sounded like a nice complete song. Track three, Old Dirt Road, meanwhile, kind of felt like it was a more intense version of a song like Imagine, those dreamy strings. And unfortunately, I just found the strings were a bit too loud on this one. I could barely hear the lyrics, which felt like a waste because this was a song John Lennon co-wrote with another great co-writer, Harry Nilsson. But I think this was probably the weakest moment on the record for me. Track four, on the other hand, if we're going to refer back to songs from the early records, track four, What You Got, is kind of reminiscent of a sort of edgy, angry thing like Give Me Some Truth. And this time the fuller sound really works and it completes it and makes it as good a sound as it could be. It's one of the best songs on this record. Now, I should mention at this point, this album was recording during what's called John Lennon's Lost Weekend. This was not a weekend, it was an 18-month period in which he was separated from Yoko Ono and tried to be in a relationship with someone else he had taken an interest in named May Pang. The album's themes seem to be largely about how John Lennon wanted to return to Yoko Ono. And we can hear hints of this in the various lyrics. Track one, Going Down on Love, when John says going down on my knees, it's like he's begging for Yoko to return to him. And in track four, What You Got, we have some kind of obvious lines like, baby, 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 give me one more chance. And also perhaps a subtler line that goes, everybody's got to bag. It makes me think of the Yoko Ono performance art piece where you just go to her gallery and there's a big black bag and you're supposed to climb around inside the bag. Now, I've mentioned tracks one, three, and four, but I did not mention track two, which is quite possibly the most famous song on this record, as it was John Lennon's only solo #1 hit in the United States. And it also features Elton John. My first impression of the song was it was definitely catchy. The song is called Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and it kind of sounds like an Elton John song. It's just not the most interesting thing out there. However, when I took the time to look at the lyrics, I noticed there were a few lyrics kind of hidden in there that made the song more interesting than the catchy chorus makes you think at first. So the first verse goes, whatever gets you through the night, all right, it's all right. It's your money or your life, it's all right, it's all right. Don't need a sword to cut through flowers, oh no, oh no. So the weird part for me is I've listened to this song many times before, but I've never heard that line about don't need a sword to cut through flowers. And there are a couple other lines like that. So it's like this psychological thing where on the one hand, maybe John Lennon's vocals are a bit mumbly, but also you just hear this sort of very catchy riff about whatever gets you through the night. And it's like it stops you from paying attention to the more interesting, more subtle lyrics that, this is not just a song about partying through the night, but it's about sort of real emotional struggle, trying to get through not just the night, but every day of your life. Track number five is called Bless You. This one has a jazz poppy or perhaps kind of psychedelic sound. And the key lyrics in it are, some people say it's over now that we spread our wings, but we know better, darling. So remember, this is the Lost Weekend album. John Lennon is separated from Yoko Ono in this period. And one thing I've struggled with in the little bits of reading about it, it's hard for me to tell the degree to which the Lost Weekend basically was just a breakup, and the degree to which it was maybe something subtler, something less absolute, whether it was a genuine experiment in polyamory. It was Yoko Ono who told May Pang that John Lennon was interested in, for instance. And this is one of the moments on this album where maybe there's sort of some sort of championing of polyamory. John Lennon saying here, just because we're separated doesn't mean we can't also kind of be together at the same time. The lyrics are vague, but that's certainly a possible interpretation. And on an album where there's virtually nothing political, like John Lennon has thrown that part of him in the past, this might be the closest thing to a bit of a protest song. Track number 6 is called I'm Scared. And for me, it was reminiscent of sort of Southern infused satanic songs from actually Disney movies, like the Oogie Boogie Man song and the Friends on the Other Side from Princess and the Frog. So I don't know if those songs were influenced by a particular style of music that John Lennon was also referencing, or whether they were influenced by John Lennon, or what exactly is going on there. But regardless, I thought it was a cool concept for the song, if maybe a bit overproduced. A nice change for Lennon. Usually I feel like he's a bit underproduced. But yeah, it's basically just a song about John dealing with his inner dualities, the side of him he doesn't like as much, and the side of him that's vulnerable and that he wants to take care of, that he wants to, make it through life as a good person. Track number 7 is called Number 9 Dream. I guess this is the other big hit along with Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and quite possibly the best song on this album. I felt like the production here was pretty solid. It's a nice thick sound, but Lennon's lyrics come out on top and are nice and clear. You just have to be prepared for there's one moment where he's singing in a sort of made up language that sounds like a combination of Japanese and French. And the reason he's singing in a made up language is this song is quite literally about a dream. So he's trying to create this image of wandering around in a dream, one way of imagining, I guess, getting back to Yoko. I find it interesting that there seems to be this sort of coherent feel. I mean, I guess I skipped a couple records, but back on Imagine, in his love song, Oh Yoko, he said, in the middle of a dream, I call your name. And from the little bit of I know of the Mind Games album, there's also a dreamy feel on that one. So something about the imagery of dreams clearly always resonated with John Lennon. Track number 8 is called Surprise, Surprise, Sweet Birds of Paradox. This one didn't seem that interesting lyrically, but it was a nice and different sound. It actually sounded more like George Harrison to me than like John Lennon, and was reminiscent of George Harrison compositions like Savoy Truffle and What Is Life. This song was actually supposedly about May Pang. I don't know if, including it this deep on the album is again John Lennon maybe experimenting with the idea of polyamory, that it was okay for him to love both Yoko and May, and to include this song for May on an album that I think is mostly about Yoko, or whether it was just an old song that he thought sounded good enough to include on the album. Who knows exactly? Track 9 is called Steel and Glass. So this one has an acoustic opening that kind of made me think of Working Class Hero. Again, if one's hearing this album is revisiting various earlier John Lennon compositions. That said, the sound quickly becomes thicker, and rather than being a reference to Working Class Hero, it sounds like a reference to the song How Do You Sleep? How Do You Sleep was a song on the Imagine album where John, in a kind of silly way, kind of weirdly vindictive way, went after Paul McCartney, but here it really sounds like John Lennon is going after himself. And he does a kind of nice little sleight of hand because he says at the beginning of the song, this is about an old friend. But when I was listening to the lyrics, it sounded far more like a critique on Lennon himself with a reference to a dead mother. Track number 10 is an instrumental called Beef Jerky. I spent a lot of it trying to figure out what other song it sounded like. And then I realized part of it was meant to sound like Paul McCartney's song, Let Me Roll It. And the reason for that was in part that Let Me Roll It was written by Paul McCartney to sound like a John Lennon song. Track number 11 brings back lyrics. It's kind of the big closer. It's called Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out. So it starts with kind of a lo-fi guitar sound that made me think of My Mommy's Dead from the end of the Plastic Ono Band album. But then it turns into this big epic thing that, if it's evocative of anything, is maybe evocative of the Beatles song A Day in the Life, also possibly David Bowie's Rock and Roll Suicide. And it gets at the way that relationship loss, or more generally being lonely, is something that drags out. And as a musician, you kind of give the illusion of dealing with it through song, but the pain kind of lingers. And then the album does truly end in a kind of more lo-fi note when he covers a Lee Dorsey song called Yeah Yeah. One of my experiences reviewing these albums for this channel comes from the fact that I grew up mostly with greatest hits CDs. And I was very excited to, actually listen to these proper albums, that are properly part of the canon with their interesting album art. But the problem is when you're raised on greatest hits collections, I feel like you often end up getting disappointed listening to albums because, greatest hits collections are like all-star teams and albums are like regular teams. So I found with the earlier Lennon stuff, Plastic Ono Band and a little bit in Imagine, it felt like the songs were a bit simple, a bit underproduced, but the ideas behind them were really good. This was Lennon being hippie, Lennon being political. And now we get to Walls and Bridges, and Lennon has sort of mastered his musical sound. It's nice and filled in. It's not amateur in sometimes frustrating ways, but he's kind of all done with his sort of hippie political lyrics, let alone the psychedelic lyrics he had in the Beatles years. So as a result, most, if not all of these songs are very good, but they're all kind of melancholy. They don't really capture your imagination the way a song like Imagine would. So I had the experience with John Lennon I had with a lot of artists where they'll do something great on one album, something great on another album, and you just wish you could combine all those various bits of greatness together and make one truly perfect album. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.